Welcome to the Reel to Reel Fishing Podcast. Today, we're joined by three legendary captains from Eastern North Carolina, Captain Ricky Kellum, Captain Jeff Cronk, and Captain Joe Tunstall. They have over 75 years of combined experience fishing our coastal waters. The North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries recently published a proposal regarding spotted sea trout. The findings have led to many questions without a lot of answers. In this episode, we address those questions from the point of view of the daily fisherman. A special thanks is extended to Toby Burton and Performance East for hosting our captain's panel. As always, thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I've got some really special guests with me this week. To my left, Captain Jeff Cronk. To my right, Captain Ricky Kellum. And then on the corner, Captain Joe Tunstall. I feel like for myself, I'm at the wrong table. Like I'm at the adult table, and I'm supposed to be at the little table eating turkey right now. But I do appreciate you guys coming, and the three of you together. Like I said before we started, I really value your opinion, not only on the topic that we're going to talk about, but on all kinds of topics. You and I have had conversations, Joe, offline, and Ricky, you and I have had them. I've had a few with Jeff. But let's start first with where we are in this process. So the DMF called a meeting, and they've had it in several areas, and the whole purpose of the meeting was to scope the opinion of the anglers, the commercial guys, and then they had a private one, I believe, with some of the charter captains.
Yeah.
And were you in attendance for that?
I think they had 3 or 4 meetings in different areas. Joe and I were at one last week in Morehead City.
Okay.
Yeah, that was good. And I'm gonna go ahead and catch you on it. Their whole purpose on that, they didn't seem like they wanted to talk about the management as much as they wanted to establish a rapport with the guides, which has been long overdue for that to happen. And they just the people got on the discussion of fisheries issues or whatever. They explained a lot of things that I didn't fully understand, so I was happy to be there. But they made it really clear that at least right now their intention was just to establish a rapport with their guides. And there was probably 30 or more really good ones, and probably 8 or 10 kind of newer guys there. But I was happy to be there and glad that they were having it, because we get asked a lot of questions that I don't have good answers to, because the transparency isn't exactly there. And I didn't do a good job speaking, but that was at that event. But that was one of the things that I was trying to say is there's trust and transparency issues, and they need to be improved upon.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Did you attend any of the meetings at all? I know you had. So you've had surgery, so you've kind of been on the sideline a little bit.
Yeah, I've been down and out.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've seen in the scoping meetings, watching some of them online, and talking with some guys who were up at the one at Barco, and then the one in New Bern, and the one in Wilmington, is the board started the conversation with, we are not going to address this, and this. And anytime you come into a situation where you want people's opinion, but you're not going to address how you came to the conclusion, I feel like that's where the trust and the transparency really just kind of gets thrown out the window, And for me, I watched the room instantly get defensive, and it was kind of tragic to me, because I don't think it needed to be that way. What they were trying to accomplish was, hey, we want to reduce the harvest. How do you want us to do it? And I don't even know that we need one at this point, but I'm going to lean on you guys for what you think about that situation.
I think 14%. Isn't that the number they keep talking about?
It was 50,000 pounds.
Yeah, but they want to reduce the impact by like 14.7% or something like
minimum.
that. Yeah.
Minimum. Yeah. Which is, again, 14 point whatever percent of what number.
Where's that number coming from?
Right.
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't even know how long I've been chartered. But I don't know how the DMF I don't even know how many trout I've caught. Nobody's ever asked. They'll call up how many trips I run every week and how many people I've taken, where they live, are they married, but they never ever ask, well, how many trout did you catch today? How many did you release? You know, like you were saying, if we had a good relationship with them, I might would share that information. But right now, you feel like you're punished by sharing that information. So I just don't know how to come up with the number.
Yeah, I think like Rick is saying, that's the biggest problem. Joe was saying this at the last meeting, is that transparency. If you're going to put restrictions on the public for catch, closing stuff down, whatever it be, you have to have transparency, especially on where you're coming up with those figures.
Sure.
We know there's a formula they have. We don't know what that formula is, on what percentage of our license holders, recreational fishing license holders, they say are fishing how many days a week or how many days a month or how many days a year for a certain species, in this case speckled trout. So, where's that formula at? Why is that not shared? And that's a big deal.
Right. And they shared what I saw was like the block diagram version, which was A times B equals C. And I think what I noticed was the offensive part was almost like you're not smart enough to understand this. And there were a lot of intelligent people in that room. And the irony of it is, no matter whether they graduated high school, graduated college, or finished 7th grade, they're not dumb. They know how to read a room. One thing we're all good at, a good charter captain knows how to read the room.
You're an entertainer first.
100% you're an entertainer. And you know how to read people and whether they're having a good time and when you need to shift and when you need to go do this or do something different. And what we read in that room was, you're just not going to understand this. And the truth is, we probably would.
Exactly. Well, and that was one thing I noticed a difference in, between the meeting they did for the charter fleet, and that is it was all the top honchos that was at the charter fleet meeting. And they explained in depth a little bit more about where they get the MRIP numbers and stuff like that from. But I picked up on the same vibe at the trout scoping that you and a lot of other people did, is that those people thought we were barbarians. We were like basically barbarians at the gate, like Hannibal,
Well, now, to their credit, there are a few, as the saying goes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. There are a few that probably should hold their tongue. And unfortunately, those loud, small fringe groups are the ones that
get the attention.
And they're the ones who end up being the face of the recreational angler, and that's not the case. So
the other thing I was thinking about too is, we talk about transparency. It's not just about the formula being used to determine the number of fish taken, but myself and Joe, we were talking about this recently, and then I was talking with another friend of mine that runs trips, Rick Patterson. They're sampling. It's locations.
Yeah.
The one thing that they are, I'm sure, good at is their biologists are good at extrapolating data. But they're not the environmentalist on the water like Ricky Kellum, like Joe, like myself, like most of the professional guides, and many of the recreational anglers that take it upon themselves to make a certain target, whether it be speckled trout or red drum, whatever, make it their goal to understand that fishery. So we all spend our time on the water day in and day out, every minute we get a chance to. We pay so much attention to weather patterns, temperature, salinity, bait movement, wind direction, and everything. And we can usually predict with pretty good, results of where fish are moving to. For instance, we watched DMF do a lot of sampling early this winter and midwinter, off some of the creeks off the Neuse, the lower Neuse near the mouth. A lot of those fish were not there.
no.
We had, in talking to several of my friends that guide, in the Swansboro area, Ricky just down south of us there too, in New River, we really look forward to that fall migration. About October, when bait really starts pushing out, heavily out of the Neuse and Pamlico systems and out to the inlets, and those fish start staging up. Most years, many years, September, October, we get massive rainfalls. We get multiple hurricanes that just miss us. Maybe we get hit. We get 4 to 7 inch dumps back to back to back. It drops the salinity in the Pamlico and Neuse River system, keeps the bait out, keeps the fish out in the massive open sounds along the beaches up there. And then we start getting cold weather, they're pushing south with those baits. And we, Ricky especially, him and I down south here, we see that mass migration of those trout from one of the biggest estuaries there is in the U.S. completely. I mean, we're dealing with Louisiana, or the Gulf Coast, Chesapeake Bay, and North Carolina.
Right.
Okay, one of the biggest estuaries, backwater to raise those trout. And we see fish coming down from Chesapeake as well.
Correct.
So we get this massive flow of fish. When we see, a lot of rain like that for September, October, we see the love. We see those numbers of fish shared up and down the eastern seaboard, North Carolina, even pushing into South Carolina. This past year, when we saw those hurricanes, they didn't hit us. They were no concern for us as residents along the coast here. But what we did have is we had the first one passed south of us, moved inland. We were already having a week above normal high tides, about a foot above normal, followed by a week of 2 to 3 foot above normal with that hurricane passing. As it subsided and that thing passed, we still had pretty good tides. Second one came a few weeks later. We had another couple feet above normal high tide. No rain hardly in our area. Massive salinity spikes, increases in salinity. We were seeing bull red drum above New Bern downtown after the first one.
We were.
Water clarity like crazy, like we hadn't seen in years.
Yeah.
And I looked at my friends at Guide and Swansboro, the newer ones that I talked to, and I said, look, this is not good for us. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, the trout fishing is not going to be as good for us this year. Not that the trout population's not good,
Right.
but the massive watershed of the Neuse and Pamlico River system, that deep water, that a lot of people would never even look to target a trout in the middle of those rivers in the dead of the winter, they're going to be up there. They're going to be up there, and we're going to see our local populations, the fish who are here that dumped out of our rivers all summer and fall, they'll start to push back into our rivers and creeks, and we'll catch some nice trout, but it's going to be short-lived.
Sure.
And
It's transitional.
that's
at that
exactly
point.
what we've seen.
Yeah.
I don't know if we should be talking about the fact that it's past. It's past now, but
No, I think it's important to bring light on that, because what it shows is that these patterns are dictated by more than just how many fish are there, or at least let me back up. The number of fish are dictated by these patterns,
Right.
Period.
Exactly.
And what that said, because what I've seen personally is I've seen in and around. I mean, it doesn't matter to talk about this now because those fish are long gone.
Right,
but we had fish all the way up almost to Pollexville.
Yeah.
When I put out in Lawson Creek and I make my way halfway to Pollexville and I see Ricky Junior Sinclair and Alan Jernigan, I'm like, oh my God, what are y'all doing here? And they're like, this is where the trout is, Bubba. We're going to catch them, And I don't blame you, because that's exactly what happened. And we talked about it quite a bit, where, the tarpon in the Neuse this past year was unbelievable. And you've got to have that high salinity for them to push that far. They pushed as far as the reds did this year.
Yeah.
Those big reds. I mean, they were up by the train trestle. They were up right there by Wildlife Landing on the other side of the trestle. I mean, people calling me, putting in their boats going, hey, man, there's tarpon up here. I'm like, holy crap. So, and I think that's what's missed is we have failed to acknowledge that we had ideal conditions for the past 5 years since Hurricane Florence of low rain, high salinity, and plenty of bait. And for me, it's exciting because that's where I'm running charters. For you guys, I mean, I can see where now you're at the boat ramp here in Cape Carteret, and they're recording data, and it's like, oh, it doesn't look that great, And then in the meantime, I mean, there's just so many fish up in the Neuse, it's crazy.
Well, and here's another thing. Take it to the next level, and I know Jeff will appreciate this because we talked about this. Why don't they take a look at, we've got 150, 200 years of information that you can pull from. Hurricane Florence, I think we all can, maybe Ricky hasn't chimed in on it, but I think we all can agree that Hurricane Florence came and kind of changed the trajectory of how the years have been since then. I mean, it changed my life as a whole. But the year after Florence I was kayak fishing that winter right after Florence, and that's when I caught my personal best trout. I mean, it was phenomenal for me that year. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And those were ocean fish that were coming into those back creeks that I was fishing 4 miles past the bridge, 8 miles from the inlet, but in direct flow, where that fish can easily follow that flow up in there. But what you have is a lot of other factors. There's been Probably 7 square miles of Shackford has disappeared since 2012. I mean, gone. It's all the way back to the rock jetty that was covered up in the storm of 1930. That has changed. That's showing that there's some sort of significant change, even if it's a couple of degrees, in how either the Gulf Stream's flowing or the Labrador Current or something like that. It's not some great big the sky is falling deal, because it's a trend that we've been in before. There used to be a fort across from Fort Macon that was there. It was a crossfire fort back prior to the War of 1812. Through the 1700s, it was built to protect the coast from the Spanish. So obviously it's a trend that we've been in before, but trying to get one of those pointy heads to acknowledge that is like trying to draw sugar out of one of those concrete parking stops out there. It's not going to happen, and that's kind of what Jeff was hitting on. He understood what I was talking about at that God meeting that we had there in Moorhead. That's what I was like. I was like, exactly what Jeff said. He said it much more eloquently than I did that night. But it was like, we're on the water every day. It's our job to analyze and understand patterns. I'm looking back to patterns of when I was 5 or 6 years old, and patterns that my dad told me. He used to fish Durham's Creek when he was a kid because there was speckled trout up in there. I mean, Durham's Creek up by Tunstall Swamp Road, named after my great-granddaddy. He used to catch trout in there years ago, and now you go through there and it looks like a wood duck haven. I mean, it's all some sort of trend that changes over the years, and instead of trying to investigate that trend and say, hey, look, whatever you want to make out of that trend, like we had good cobia fished in 2012 and it sucks now around here anyway. I mean, there's obviously some sort of trend going on that can be analyzed and looked at, but they don't want to do that. They want to jump on some bandwagon and say, oh my God, trout aren't being overfished, but overfishing is occurring. Well, I can understand what they mean by that, but can the average person understand what they're talking about?
I think the biggest thing about that was, I understood it right away when they said, hey, it's not overfished. But, and they, honestly, to give them credit, they did put out a good analogy. They said, hey, you got plenty of money in the bank, but at the rate you're taking out money, you're not putting enough in. All right, I get that analogy. But, again, what are you comparing that to? How do you know how many fish are there?
Right.
How do you measure a biomass that large and know without certainty we have to reduce the amount of harvest that we're doing? And that's the part that I really have a big disconnect with. So,
well, you got fish coming from up the Chesapeake Bay. You got fish coming from the top of the Pamlico. Absolutely. How do you manage that? I mean, they've been trying to do it for 30 years, trying to figure it out.
You can't manage it individually. It's too complicated, and as Jeff pointed out, it's subject to fluctuations in everything. So you might not have a lot of fish in New River simply because just a lot of fish didn't show up there, and they all came to River
You're back
Bend.
to work.
Yeah, they all came. Yeah, literally.
Well, about 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to sit on the Speckled Trout Advisory Board. Big deal. I thought.
Right.
And made a trip once a week to Little Washington, and sit and listen, to the biologists that you would love to believe, And she kept running off numbers. I'm talking about numbers. How many fish are here? How many fish are there? I said, well, look, I'm going to make it real easy for you. New River, Short River, it begins and ends in the same county. I said, how many trout you think we got in New River? Oh, we don't take analysis that far south. I said, you mean to tell me you don't? It's one of the best rivers in North Carolina. You don't do any research there? I said, how about the Cape Fear River? I said, it's a pretty big deal too. Yeah. No, we do all our studies really in the Pamlico is what she told me the biologist did. Right.
Well, and again, I think how wholesale change for the whole area is just not, to me, it's not the right thing. But that's, again, I invited you guys to kind of chime in on it. So I think what started the really big backlash was the presentation by Mr. Cross of some of the changes. And just to highlight a couple, some things I really don't have an issue with. If you came down and said, we really care about these fish, we really care about the population, we're going to tell you that you need to run inline hooks. While I don't like it, if that's what they said, I'm going to follow. I'm going to follow the law. Number one, I'm always going to do what they tell me to do because you can't just have anarchy. You know, that's what breeds worse problems. So just like they talked about at some of the meetings, you've got guys, and I watched it with coolers full of trout, and I'm not talking coolers full of 14-inch trout. I mean 3-4 pound trout all, and I'm like, really, there's no sense in all that. But you know, that's you breaking the law. You do your thing. If they said there was a slot limit, sure. But again, why?
Why?
What is the benefit? So I know you read, Jeff, I know you read Mr. Cross's, his recommendations.
Yeah, and, you know, I think one of the things that hit everybody to the core and upset people was specifically when they talked about, when Cross, his recommendation talked about, if there's a season and a quota and a season and then, it shuts down, is not allowing any fishing of any kind.
Catch and quit.
Right, catch and quit. I think they did talk about possibly no artificial versus no live bait, that kind of thing, one versus another, but still it was kind of a catch and quit fishery. That's such a broad statement. Again, when you start talking about people, the recreational population who really knows the fishery, as well as all of your guides, anybody who knows the fishery, well, you're shutting off basically during that time of the year. It depends on what season it is, but you're shutting off, it could be potentially half of the state waters.
Right.
It's absurd.
Right.
And I feel like, and I don't know that anyone sitting at this table would directly disagree, I felt like his statement was like a controversial statement all around. Like its entire purpose was to get attention and create controversy,
100%.
One might even arguably say it was a jab, because of his allegiances or whatever. But regardless of that speculation, I think that the whole thing was just thrown out there as an antagonistic remark to get people's attention and get some feedback on it and get people fired up.
It really felt like let me throw all this against the wall and see what sticks. And it was several recommendations. I mean, there was inline, there was quotas, there was seasons, there was catch and quit. And if you put all that together, I mean, it spells absolute doom for what, in my opinion, is one of the best fisheries in the world.
Right,
So,
and again, you're looking at North Carolina waters, our estuaries, our backwaters. It's North Carolina, it's Chesapeake Bay, and it's Louisiana, the Gulf Coast. I mean, and we don't see limits down there like we're seeing, like we're wanting to see imposed here. We have the number of trout. We have them. We can't even begin to count the number of fish 14 inches on down. Whether you're in the, fishing the Neuse and Pamlico or on the coastal end, it's crazy, those numbers. Yep. The only thing that I've seen in my 25 years of guiding and another 15, 20 years of commercial fishing with my dad, the only thing that I've seen that massively affects that speckled trout population is our cold weather, specifically our snow events.
Sure.
And it has to be pretty good snow events. And if you have that preceded by cold and then followed by cold, extreme cold, then we're going to see mass numbers of trout die.
Right.
And, since we had that last cold event quite a few years back, even things like Florence, it just shifted the populations temporarily.
Yeah.
And then when those fish came back to where they're supposed to be, we saw what was really there.
Yeah.
Our numbers are so great in North Carolina. There is no reason, there's nothing wrong. As far as the future of trout, I see nothing wrong personally with having some kind of like change in our our either quota, not quota necessarily, but possibly our size limit change or even a slot, that kind of thing, to protect some of those big breeders.
Sure.
But so everybody's not just filling the cooler with 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 pounders and stuff like that. But at the same time, to sit there and to contemplate putting a slot on it as well as a small quota on top of a season, all three of those, that's absolutely ridiculous.
And then grouping all that under a catch and quit,
Yeah, right. Even worse.
I think the catch and quit was just. I think, like I said, I think it's throw it up against the wall, see if it sticks, and it was. I think it may have been done just to get everybody's attention, because typically what you see at scoping meetings are the same handful of people crying about the same two things, and nothing ever really comes of it. What I saw at this was a lot more people than I've ever seen in the previous years with scoping meetings, and
And
that's actually, to me, that's a good thing.
It is. It's a good thing.
Regardless of how it happened, because I don't agree with any of the statements that he made. None, zero. But, it got everybody's attention, and everybody. So to me, that's a good outcome from a ridiculous statement, which is awesome.
all the people at this table, I could probably say there are times when we have to not do as we would like to do with clients on the boat, but I will say that probably for the last 15 years, I've been abiding by my own slot limit with speckled trout. Sure. Anyway, I mean,
Ricky and I have had this conversation so many times offline, it's ridiculous. And once you get to a certain limit on the boat, whether you're imposing 4 per person or whether you're going to keep 10 on the boat and that's it, he doesn't cull.
yeah.
There's no culling. No, we kept that 16-inch fish. It's been in the live well for 2 hours. That's fine,
Yeah.
And in the same breath, though, you've got guys who tournament fish who spend all this money on these aerated systems to make sure those fish stay alive. I don't want to take away their right to do that, but if they do it with and most of them do, they do it with an attitude of, I want this fish to live. So
The other thing too, you mentioned stuff like that. Stuff like culling. Where's the transparency on as far as collection of data, tests done here in North Carolina?
yeah,
And not using test data based on speckled trout out of places so far south where they're dealing with extreme hot water the majority of the year. Again, a lot of it is handling, and then a lot of it is going to be the type of hook and where it was hooked at. But with the majority of our fish hooked in the mouth and stuff like that, what we see is rarely, especially during our fall when it's cooling down, our winter months where it's cold, and then our spring where it's still cool, about a half of our year with much cooler temperatures than a lot of places these studies are being done. Where's that transparency and where's the new data based on North
Right.
Carolina? If you're going to shut us down on multiple levels, like they're talking about, or restrict on multiple levels, where's the data for our areas,
Right.
for our water temperatures, stuff like
especially
that.
when most of your data says that catch and release is good, and it's a good practice, and that was kind of my question. I don't know, I think you were in New Bern, weren't you?
I was in New Bern, yeah.
And that was my question, is like, you're saying that we should promote catch and release, but then you're telling me that one out of every 10 fish I catch or more are going to die. I really haven't a big issue with that because I don't see the data on that.
Right.
And what I've seen is if the tagging program works, why it was, to me, it was almost just an immediate conflict of interest right at that point. So, but Ricky, what do you think about that?
Well, I was trying to think how long me and Jeff has known each other. We fished against each other forever. And not speaking for Jeff, he can answer it the way he wants to, but I'm just thinking back. You mentioned I've been fishing 100 years. Well, 50 of them, I'm 56. And I know I was
53,
fishing at 6.
Yeah.
And as far as I can remember back, I don't know of a bad year. Great. We're going to have a great year, a good year, fair year. I cannot remember what I would say a bad year of speckled trout fishing in this area. I just can't.
We threw a bunch of small fish. That's about it. But that's optimistic from our perspective because that's the next crop.
Oh yeah,
Our
absolutely.
fear always was just a massive snow event. That was
Yeah.
our
That's-
only fear.
Yeah.
And even with that, man, in a year, it was
Yeah,
like it
it
never
rebounded,
happened. I don't know
it
where they
rebounded,
come from.
1989.
Oh, yeah.
1989, there was dead fish in all the canals that I grew up on, dead drum, dead trout.
Yep.
It stayed iced over so long, they went from stunned to dead.
Yep.
And we had several cold years after that, up until about 1993. And some of the best trout fishing I ever had was during that time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of argument, like with a hurricane, how many of these events come through that, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, that God intended to come through. It has to come through at that time. Look at what happens after a hurricane. It takes sand away. It puts sand back. It comes through. The old timers down east there used to say it's like a plow. It's a big plow coming through, turning the bottom up, and there's life after it. And I've
I'm
seen
telling
that.
you, man, I've said the same thing before, and one of the things I said about post-Florence New Bern was it's like it flushed all the crap out of here.
It has
and
to
we've had a
happen.
better fishery since then.
That's the other frustrating part. How are we I'm not speaking necessarily of people at this table, but as a society as a whole, so arrogant to believe that these things don't have to occur for a reason, just like y'all were talking about how good after Florence things were. Yeah. And I was up there doing salvage work at the Ramada Inn. We had 30 boats down at the Ramada Inn, and I had divers. I was a salvage master, and I had divers going in the water there with, dead, rotten, exploded stripers and catfish. They were going through a layer of muck about 3 feet to go down there to work on a boat in 92, 93 degree water up there, and that was bad. I mean, you're looking at that and you're like, man, we're never going to come back off of this. But I know, having lived my whole life here and being wise, and like Jeff and Ricky talk about, us paying attention and seeing these trends, to know that it was going to come back. Did I think it was going to come back as good as it did? No, not really. As quick as it did? No, but it did. And that just goes to show that these events were meant to happen.
You know what? And like speckled trout, one of the very distinct species versus some other species we have, you're dealing with a fish that spawns multiple times a year, right? You're dealing with a fish that, we like to say, as you move into the winter months, all these certain populations, they go offshore. Certain fish, like stripers, like a lot of them might go back up river. But speckled trout, it's like God put him everywhere. I hate to say it, but you will get the mass numbers that push up our rivers and up our creeks as far as they can go, where you're sitting with a largemouth bass and a catfish. And then at the same time, you've got from spikes to, citation-sized fish, in the ICW. Yeah. And you've got them out along the beaches, and we catch them out along the wrecks and stuff like that. Yeah. This fish does not just go into a location and inundate an area that when we do get a snow event, the entire population is annihilated.
No, that's what
it
else
may
is
take
so
out
funny.
some of those fish, definitely, but they're spread out all over.
Yeah, right.
And they rebound really quick because of their
they spawn multiple times, and that's been a discussion I've had a lot with clients on the boat, and they're if they catch one and it's 22, 23 inches, and I'll give them the option. Hey, I'll tell you can let it go. But if you want to keep it, that's up to you. And if you keep it, that's okay too, because that fish for the past 10 inches has been spawning over and over and over. So those eggs, that DNA is already out there. It's already been out there.
And even when you think about the numbers of, who knows what those numbers are, how many hundreds of thousands of times more there are of little 15, 14, 13-inch fish that are spawning versus even our handful, who knows the numbers either, of our large citation-sized fish. Yeah. The numbers of the eggs that are released from those large ones doesn't even compare with the eggs released from the small ones. That being said, my curiosity has always been the one of no different than, people at this table. Some of us are 6 foot tall, and some are like 6'4" and 6'5", genetically disposed to be bigger. There's always that curiosity. Does a 10-pound trout, is he more genetically disposed to produce a 10-pound trout?
Well, that's what they're saying. They're saying maybe a probability of better genetics. Some of it's probably luck too, But they also say, when you follow the research, especially coming out of Texas from the Release Over 20 program, they're like, by the time that fish is like over about 8 years old or 7 years old, it's just, they're not producing. They may produce 30 million eggs, but only a percentage of those are going to be healthy. So there's a certain period in there where those eggs are more prone for survival than other points. And so keeping and killing those big fish, that 28, 29, 30-inch fish, hopefully you like to think, and the research suggests also that those fish have already done their part in contributing to the gene pool. So it's not that terrible big a deal. Obviously I'm going to put the fish back and let it swim if I think it's still strong, but if you want to get that trophy, which is why we all were talking about at that meeting, that 1 over, if they did do a slot thing, if they did change the numbers, blah, 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 you should be able to have that 1 over fish in there, because, there's nothing to be worse than you're already at your limit or whatever, and you got that, you're not allowed to keep that one big fish, say, and she's done choked that lure down to her gills, and it's tore one of her gills, and you've got to throw her back dead. That would be terrible. When you could come in and get your nice citation for. And
I agree.
At the meeting they had for the guides, I told them, I said, y'all should work on your release incentive program. I said, there's nothing worse than getting your release back for that 29-inch speckled trout or whatever, and it comes back one speckled trout released.
Yeah, I got one of those. Last year I was very intentional about making sure that all of them were documented, and I had a really good day of 3 back-to-back casts, 26s, boom, boom, boom. And so I made sure I sent those in, and what did the certificate say when it came back? 3 released, and that was it. And I'm like, well, this doesn't really give any incentive for people to let them go. They want that. I mean, the wahoo I caught in 2012 that was 71 pounds right there at Swansboro Hole, or not Swansboro Hole, the Honey Hole right out here. Light lining for Spanish and catch a 71 pound wahoo.
Wow.
It says 71 pounds, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's like, yes, that is awesome. But we are not the problem. Commercial, rec, charter, we're not the problem. Fringe groups in those are problems, without a doubt. There's people who break the law on any side. They're going to bend the rules. They're going to break the rules and do what they want to do because they feel entitled.
Yeah, that's an enforcement thing.
The same arrogance that says these fish will never rebound because they don't understand the cosmic picture of what actually goes on. But I think some of the things, and that's kind of where I want to segue into this, is what can we do? We know what we can do as charter captains, but just as an average angler, and for the average guy listening to this podcast, before DMF even comes down with a decision, because they're going to come down with a decision. Something's going to happen. They're going to reduce harvest in some way, shape, or form. What can we do to
prevent it?
Yeah, I wish we could. No, I mean, education about you. One of the things you hit on was like, teaching people about how to properly release fish, how to let them go.
I think Jeff should start that. He's pretty good. But, yeah, I think go around. There's a lot of things that we can talk about. And I try to do it, again, like you said, the problem's not us. But on every charter, I mean, you get some that are different than others. But on every charter, I try, if the door is open, to educate my people, especially if they ask questions, which a lot of them do. They're chartering me to ask questions to be better. A lot of them are, and I take every opportunity to try to, why do you use a rubber net? Well, why do you use those single hooks on your topwater plugs? Or why don't you use a treble hook? I don't live bait fish much, but when I am bait fishing, why are you using that big circle hook or whatever? And I try to, educate people on that level every time. And I'll continue to do that as long as I can talk and as long as I can take people fishing or stand next to somebody and fish. But, I think the average person, to me, it's difficult because there's so much data out there. We carry it around in our hand, in our pocket. It's at the house. There's a lot of data out there. So any question that you have an answer to or don't have an answer to, Google it and look it up. And that's not to say you're not going to find misinformation or the wrong information out there. But,
Are you saying the internet isn't true all the time?
Unfortunately, yes. The intranet isn't always accurate. But, somebody who wants to find the truth can find the right answers out there, and they can find enough reviews or find a credible enough source on something. But I think that there's a lot of little things that can be done. Are you having a fish fry to feed your whole family or your whole church? Do you need... personally, I don't freeze speckled trout. I like to eat them fresh when I catch them. Some things freeze better than other things, and I'm not saying they're not good frozen, but they're still good. I mean, I ate frozen my whole life. We filled our freezer up and ate on them all winter long and all spring and summer. But I prefer to eat fresh, so it all just depends on what works for the person. I think rubber nets are definitely easy. I use at least single hooks on all my topwater plugs. My mirror lures aren't all changed over to singles, but on my top waters, I like single hooks. And, I like a size fish. I don't like cleaning a bunch of 14-inch fish. I like cleaning 16, 18. To me, my slot is 18 to about 21 inches. And, males croak. So if you got a male on there that's croaking and he's 21 or 22 inches, don't beat yourself up if you're trying to do better by keeping that male. There's always going to be at least 10 to 1 males versus females, probably arguably 50 to 1 sometimes, depending on where you're fishing at. But
that must be at Camp Lejeune.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless it's July at Sneeze Ferry Bridge, they're going to be all females.
I mean, in handling practices, don't let that fish flop around the deck. And some of those people you were talking about earlier, Dana, they're the first ones that's going to grab that old rag and wrap around that fish and wipe all that slime off. And even though they're proving that that's not as bad as people thought, it still can't help. It can't make it any better on the fish, and just, proper handling practices are key. If a catch and release fishery is what you're aiming for, and a good harvest on the fish that you do keep. That way you're getting the very best meat that you get when you do get ready to eat it.
And like you said, like Joe said, we do this as guides, and I think the more experienced, just recreational anglers, they do a lot of this as well. But you would think that a state entity like the NCDMF, who is in charge of regulating this fishery, whether it's commercial or recreational, they themselves would have this out.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a beautiful website right there. It doesn't take much, even again, working with guides. It could be working with their biologists, whatever, to put out some quick little videos, 1, 2, 3 minute little videos, whether it be on the single hooks on baits like that, or whether it be handling your fish, whether it be, take your fish, don't just drop them on ice. A lot of times we do put them in a live well. If one does croak for some reason, dies, we'll put that one on ice, and when it lives, we put them back. Every little thing like that. There can be a dozen of those quick little how to make the fishery better, sustain the fishery longer. But again, we don't have that. Yeah, it's not there.
And I talked to Kathy about that. That was one thing that I directly talked to her and the others that were listening to me about was I think everybody in that room, or most everybody in that room that night, would be willing to work with, and that's what I talked about. I'm like, I'm bonded. I got $1 million liability insurance. You want to verify me, whatever. I get you don't want to put it on with some jackleg or something like that, but go through whatever vetting process you need to go through and put researchers on the boat with me, put a video crew on the boat with me, and let's go out and let's do some of these things, because it's like Jeff's saying, if you put 20 little videos out there about things that you can do to be better, then somebody's got a whole plethora of information to choose from. And even if you don't agree with single hooks or this or that or the other, you've got what you can choose from. And if you can make a difference in one little way, then you've made a difference maybe with one person, to Ricky, to you, to Jeff, to 20 people, to 30 people, to 40 people.
I think the biggest thing you hit on was the fact that if they are the governing entity to regulate the fishery, then it's their responsibility to educate the people who are buying these licenses
100%.
and who are, I know you guys with your for hire, you guys have the license on the boat for people who come into town and can't buy or don't buy a license. So that's that's $1,000 we've spent at this table to make sure that we can run those trips with those people without licenses. I mean, to me, you're responsible to me to do that, in my opinion. Like, we've spent our money,
Right.
and we're educating our people. You need to pass on this information and make sure they understand, because the biggest factor over the past few years that is kind of the elephant in the room is we had a large shutdown of the country. COVID came. You have more people on the water than you've ever seen, whether that's because there's more people on the planet or because they all now work remotely from home and go fishing a lot more. You know, whatever the reason, you have a lot more anglers on the water who honestly just don't know. And if it was common sense, everyone would have it. It's uncommon sense, and that's our responsibility. And I know for a fact, and why I invited this group of people here is because I know you guys do that. You're already doing it. But I agree, it's their responsibility. And there's plenty of information out there. And to me, it's kind of tragic that there's private entities such as Release Over 20 with David Fladd, who that's their own private thing that has made a big impact, not only in South Carolina where they're based, but all over from everywhere the speckled trout is caught, because he saw a need and went, they're not doing it. Nobody's teaching anyone about this. We need to do this. And you can argue for or against, it doesn't matter. Anytime you're doing something right. I mean, we all go to church, everybody here, I think. So, I'll just throw it out there. God said he orders your steps. He didn't say you were going to always step in the right direction. He's going to nudge you back in the right direction. So that's what David did.
Yeah.
And he saw that, and he went, I need to meet this need. I need to go ahead and create this program. And it's probably one of the most recognized conservative approaches to helping the speckled trout population. And it's tragic to me that we don't have that with the DMF.
Well, definitely, I agree, 100%. And like you said, as a government agency that should be putting this information out there, I do get that some people don't want to go to the DMF website. Not that they want to or don't want to. They've got their license. They're going fishing. On the other end of that, another avenue is how many fishing schools are there going on in North Carolina every
good
year
God.
with thousands and thousands of participants. Now, they do want to come hear from Ricky Kellum on how to catch trout. They do want to hear from Joe on targeting everything there is out here at Cape Lookout. They want to come talk to the captains and hear from them, and just the camaraderie and be there. And, again, with DMF willing to work with, because like Joe said, we have asked on multiple levels, whether it's the flounder stuff, data for trout and everything else, we have asked, use us, let's participate. They could easily be working with us and say, hey, look, such and such fishing school here, there. Can there be a presentation on these different topics we're talking about? Because now you're talking about your hand feeding it to them. And
they'll eat it up.
the public sees. I know the public that gets on our boats sees this stuff from us, but when they see it in mass numbers, because not as many people get on our boat as show up at these shows, at one time, and when they see it and hear it from all of your guides and or representatives from wherever, they're more apt to take stuff to heart too. But that's just another avenue.
It's a great idea. It's a great idea.
I'll never forget.
I see Joe's wheels turning.
Yeah.
Hold up.
Tim Ellis, when we first started tagging trout, I don't know how long it's been, 15 years ago, I guess. He was with NC State. Now he's with, I think he's with DMF now. But first tagging program, and he came to some of our seminars, and it was crazy the amount of people that had questions for him, wanting to learn. And Tim knows everything there is to know about a trout, but a brother cannot catch one. He knows everything about them. And we were out there tagging them, and he had just started. He was just doing it himself, and he was showing me how to. I had a scalpel sharp, and a lot of times the incision would be way too big. I'm like, Tim, I said, and I took the old pocket knife out. I said, Tim, if you'll just pop just a little bitty hole in there, and then let the tag make the rest of the hole. It goes in like a toggle bolt, and then he wanted, he was babying him, which I get it. Take care of the trout. But he's all down there working his tail. I said, Tim, if you'll take that trout straight into the water, man, he'll go like a shot cat.
Yeah.
And you won't get your arm bit off by a bluefish or a shark.
That's right.
But Tim was coming to some seminars, but like Jeff and Joe was saying, just get them more involved, like they should already been. Would be a
Ricky
big
hit
resource.
on a good point too. He's just in general saying that somebody can know about trout fishing.
It's a
they
practical
can know,
application.
They can know all the baits and this and that, and listen to people talk about it and go out. And the reality is, just because there's increased activity as far as people trying to target these fish, does not necessarily. Is it going to equal increased catch? Yes, but does it mean that 50 people becomes 100 people, which means it's twice the amount of fish being caught? No, it's not. I can't even begin to tell you, because of the posts that we do and the feedback we get from people. How many people message me, and I'm sure other guys here as well, message us and call us and this and that, and they're like, I was right there in the creek with you. I didn't catch anything. And we might have caught 20 or 30 nice trout, and kept our few fish that we can keep, and they're telling me they caught 1 or 2 fish.
Oh,
so,
my gosh.
Again, a problem with the collection of data and the formula that we're unaware of, right, is how are they extrapolating that data? Because no two men are created equal. No two fishermen are created equal. No. Over time, people get better, definitely. But again,
a long time.
If you could know what you're doing, I promise you, as many years as all of us have been fishing, if I took 6 months off that water, all right, and I wasn't paying attention to all those different environmental things we talked about, whether it's the tides and the salinity and the wind direction, everything else, and I go back on the water for one day I can go, like an average recreational fisherman, I will not be as successful.
Absolutely.
Not on a, overall.
Agreed.
And so just because we have more anglers on the water does not equal, and more licensed holders does not equal necessarily whatever the data is putting out for take
and
off
that goes back to their formula, which the simple block diagram formula was effort.
Yeah.
And just because there's more people trying doesn't mean that there's more people catching.
effort.
So.
2 years ago, I got into the stock market finally. Right. Did a little bit of day trading stuff.
I hear you.
I am not ahead right now.
Effort.
Okay, I put a lot of effort in. I am not ahead. So I totally understand it.
We're starting a GoFundMe for Jeff for his effort. No, but and you don't want to. You don't. It's a very fine line that we have to walk, and let people know. Hey, you've got a long way to go to become the type of angler who goes out and targets these fish on a regular basis and makes that kind of dent. Yeah. And the feeling I got in that room was that, if we can't keep our limit, blah, blah, it's
just a common sense fishery.
Half the people
is
in
what
there
we
can't
need.
catch a limit. So
Yeah.
that's not the problem. And I agree with that. So, but,
Overall, I think what's upsetting to a lot of folks who are in the industry or your recreational people who do this a lot is that when the state comes at you with, what you see as very near future, some kind of major restrictions or shutdown, when you see that, but then you have the knowledge of what the population is really like,
right.
and how strong that population is, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It hurts,
And again, nothing wrong with precautionary measures to a certain point, but the stuff that is being thrown out there, you think, wow, we're sitting on some of the best trout populations we've had in a lot of years.
Yeah.
And it's gotten better and better and better, and it's sitting on a good population right now. And like we said, just because you have more effort doesn't mean there's massive more
Right.
take,
Yeah, the biggest indication that I knew there was going to be an issue when it started, and it's because they knew they weren't going to get the answers they were looking for, and to be honest, it's their fault because you didn't present the data before you made a decision.
Right.
You should have You should have said, "Hey, this is what we're noticing. Send an email out to every angler out there. Hey, man,
They don't even have that capability.
Oh,
they
they're
talked
working on
about
it
that
now.
in the meeting. They don't
Emails
even
just
for a
came through.
mass email."
They do not. They do not. They can't even. They don't even have the capability to email all the people who are registered guides in the state.
So my wife went home immediately after the meeting and wanted, how they were very transparent with their emails and contact us and we'll answer your questions. Hadn't heard back yet.
No, I hadn't either.
I've
several
emailed
Still
twice,
studying
haven't
it,
heard
yeah.
back yet, and all the answer I wanted was, "Hey, how did you get to this number?" That's all I want to know.
First
Just
off,
tell
that's
me.
magic. They don't like to talk about that.
Well, I mean, I understand statistics and I understand how part of it is assumption,
Yeah.
but you can't assume negative without assuming positive as well.
Right.
So, but for example, if you're taking data at the ramp and I can't count how many you guys have been there, you come back and like Jeff said, we have a couple of limits of trout. We have this and this guy's going, we don't have this many. Are you saying that because I reported we had 16 trout in the boat that every boat had 16 trout? Because that's impossible. I
Right.
can tell you that's impossible.
There's no way to know.
So,
Right.
no. And that was the thing. And nobody could answer that. No one could say,
Right.
yeah, that's how we're doing it or no. And then of course the mortality rate with the discards, that was a super sore subject.
Yeah. slap in the
Now,
face.
and it's because they didn't explain.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to shed a little bit of light on that. To say that there's less discard mortality with the commercial sectors because they keep them.
Right.
Right.
They're not throwing them back. So you're going to have naturally less. But the things that aren't reported is not everybody reports how many fish they catch. And I don't care which side you're on.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be both sides. So you have to have that margin of error in there. And basically at this point, I don't think there's enough information to make these decisions,
No.
which is kind of the sad part.
No, that's like I said, that's where it goes back to collecting the data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've got to collect the data. You've got to actually collect the data. You need to be on board.
Yeah.
Well, and see, at the guide meeting,
or sample in every location. Like Ricky's saying, not sampling and doing stuff down, or not necessarily sampling, but on the water sampling. I'm not talking about at the dock, asking people what they caught, but on the water sampling of how many species are there.
Right.
Extrapolate the data. Like I said earlier, we watched them sitting in 2 creeks in the Neuse River this year. when those trout
100%.
now those trout are moving down in the past month, and they've pushed into those creeks really good, and those shock boats who I've watched in the past few weeks, all of a sudden they're seeing good numbers, shocking 100+ fish at a time,
Right.
versus back in the wintertime when they were trying to shock and finding very few fish.
Right.
And again, that's just knowing where those fish are at,
And,
again,
and why they're
knowledge.
not there.
And knowledge, with sharing that knowledge with the people who know,
Right.
so that they can go now sample. And even if you don't know, go sample every area.
You
If
still
don't have
should
the means,
sample every area.
You should. But again, a lot of times what we're dealing with on this level is the lack of number of people they have available to do sampling, and the amount of time they have available to do sampling. So they don't sample in the whole state. They sample in small places.
And that's hard to understand because of the amount of money that has to be allocated for marine
Oh,
fishing.
I don't know what the
It
budget
has-
is.
I mean-
the guide meeting, Dana, they topped it back. They copped out and said that they are restricted under their governing body, which I don't remember was the House or whomever they get their direct funding from. And they were like, they didn't have the funding to enhance their electronics for the emails. They didn't have the funding. They've just now got the funding to build an app, and they're already using the existing app to build a springboarding app, which they hope to include some of these things that everybody wants to talk about. It's going to be built on already existing platform. That's subject matter for another conversation. But they kept copying it out to their governing body that they didn't have the money to put into this research. They didn't have the money to put into these upgrades. They didn't have the money to do this. They kept opting out, blaming their own governing body.
That's
What's
kind of
crazy
sad.
is you can not have the funding, not have the ability to collect all the data like you'd like to,
but then regulate.
but then you can go ahead and regulate it and shut down the public to a public resource that supposedly, according to their own rules, whether you're recreational or commercial, you have the right to that resource as long as it's viable.
right.
You know what I'm saying?
Constitutional.
And that's what's crazy.
Yeah, that's a word that a lot of people are throwing around lately, but it's true. You do have that right, and again, misrepresentation on both sides is kind of tragic. So,
Well, I'm already getting calls because this is, everybody kind of waiting on the fence, wondering what's going to happen. I got people that's gone with me for years. There's like, look, man, I can be in South Carolina as easy as I can be on the coast of North Carolina. What do you think is going to happen? I said, man, I don't know. So they ain't got a clue. So it's going to definitely take away from tourism. But
yeah, I mean, and that was a big thing, economic impact, But I've always been one that worries about the fish. I worry about the fish, number one.
oh yeah,
And so my immediate radar goes up and goes, all right, is there a problem? And then once I attended the meeting, once I read the scoping documents, and once I saw what my brain could comprehend, I immediately went, whoa, hold up. Like, this is you are overreacting.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is crazy. So
we would be the first ones if we thought there were a problem, and I'd be all, let's shut it down.
Yeah.
yeah.
Like after a cold stun, major
Shut it
cold,
down,
come
okay.
all about it. Yeah, let's see what kind of damage is done. I mean, and that's what they don't get.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're getting to that hour mark. I told you I wouldn't keep you too long. I do appreciate your guys' input, and I mean, I can feel it now. Everybody here is like, oh gosh, like I can't believe we're at this point. But I think it's important to get together in groups like this and talk about this. I would say that the power of email is a huge thing, but apparently they don't have the infrastructure to read them. I'd like to have enough faith in the system to say, if you contact your representative, your governor, your this person, that person, that something could change. But again, I believe they're going to do something. And what they want to do is they want to reduce effort. They want to reduce harvest, or not effort, but harvest. So
I don't know anything that they've ever done that benefited us.
Right. I will say
That's
the
the
one
record I'm
positive
going
about
off
it
of.
is they didn't wait until it was like the flounder situation, where whether we agree with it or not, if the numbers are true, then they overfished flounder and they waited till the end
Can't
to do
keep 'em
something
off,
about
no.
it. Yeah.
Well, and I told them in the guide meeting that was part of the problem, and they acknowledged that, and that's what they're trying to do. And I said,
yeah.
well, okay, why don't you start talking about black drum and sheep's head? I said, why don't you figure out what you're going to do with black drum and sheep's head before you come after speckled trout? because people aren't going to be so mad about that, and something needs to be done about that anyway.
Right.
I mean, when 15, like I told him in the meeting, 15 black drum about that big ain't even worth keeping to me,
I remember when we were catching 50-pound black drum off the surf.
Yeah,
So, I mean, and that was not that long ago.
Oh yeah,
So.
and the first thing that's going to happen is if they talk about us, if they come out with a season for trout, if for some reason that season is shut down during, let's say, the winter months,
Pity the black drum.
then that leaves black drum and red drum primarily
Yeah.
for the dead of the winter, which means, like Joe was saying, now you're going to have increased pressure on red drum and black drum both. We've already seen a massive, even myself as a guide.
Yes, sir.
Some of these winter days here where I knew those trout are sitting where we talked about over in the Upper Neuse and Pamlico. I'm like, I can drive an hour over there and go run a 4-hour trip, or I've got so much time on the coast growing up here, I can go catch black drum, and I can, and possibly, depending on the wind conditions, catch some red drum.
Right.
Black drum more structure related. My red drum, I'll have to get them on the flats and the bays and creeks and stuff. But I can go target those species. So even I had a shift already this year, just because of our migrational pattern, not migrational pattern, but our patterns on trout due to the weather conditions we had. I made a shift and targeted more on black drum, and even caught sheep's head, right, like you're saying, throughout the winter. And no, I don't want to. I don't want to keep a 10, 11, or 12-inch sheep's head. I don't want to keep little 14, 15-inch black drum. But for me, running a business, I'm not the recreational person who can go, well, I'll just stay off the water today. I have to go run a business, and so we're doing different things. But like Joe's saying, we're already seeing that increased pressure on reds and black drum, and we're going to see more of it if a season comes in, especially if that season comes in the winter months.
Yeah, and I'd like to hope that they're taking that into consideration, understanding. I mean, look, we still can only keep one red drum.
Yeah.
We can only keep one flounder a day for 30 days. Something's amiss.
Well, we
Something
mentioned
is
that
amiss.
at the guys' meeting. We were talking about this. I had brought up the fact of like the gray trout. And our numbers are mass numbers. They're back for a long time. I asked them the last time they did data collection in North Carolina. I think it was 2018 or something like that.
Yeah.
Something like 2018 last time they collected data on gray trout. Now, granted, they came back and reminded us that that's an Atlantic coast thing.
Southeast, yeah.
Whole Southeast. So they don't have the power to open that back up. On the board at their meetings, they've been hearing that the numbers are not that great in Virginia, Rebound, or south of us. But North Carolina, the mecca for gray trout, our numbers are like mass. And and so they didn't have the power to do that, and that's what we were throwing back out. But you have the power to make the decisions on the speckled trout,
Right.
and on our flounder. So we've been dealing with some other stuff on our summer and Gulf flounder populations. Great numbers. Federal government says they're amazing, not a problem, and yet they've shut that fishery down on us.
Right.
So again, another thing to put pressure on the trout, which if they're putting restrictions like season on that, now we're going to put more pressure on your red drum, black drum. So we have the ability to think critically and think carefully about if they're going to put a restriction like a season on trout, which can be very harmful for other species because they're already so, everybody's tuned into those so much as it is now already. And then, to open those doors on where they have the availability to do that.
They said they were aware, and then we're like, well, we're right here. We can already keep more bluefish than your average recreational guy can. So if you're worried about, because their excuse was that if you're targeting summer and Gulf, it's going to put more impact and harm the southern flounder, which is what they don't want, which is why they won't open it. So we're like, okay, so if you don't think the average person can do that, if you would show a little faith in us like you're asking us to do in you, why don't you try it with the guides? Why don't you try it with the licensed guides and whatever stipulation you want it to be?
The argument of you can't tell the difference from one fish to the next. Yeah.
I told him, I said, if you want us to pay a little more, I said, I'm pretty sure most of the people in this room within reason would pay more to be able to do an experimental summer and Gulf flounder fishery,
Or a permit.
Or an additional
permit for the year.
Exactly, a permit for the year. Or, I know me and Jeff may be on a little different sides in this, but I'm also of the mind that I think they should do a boat limit or an additional limit on redfish. Let me pay extra for that too. If they're skeptical about something, they want us to trust them, but they should be throwing some trust in us and let us try it.
Right.
Like I said, they're allowing us to keep more bluefish.
Right.
Why not allow us to try some summer and Gulfs or whatever?
Yeah, the bluefish thing threw me for a loop a couple years ago when they took that.
That's
I was
another
like-
southeast
I was like,
Atlantic fisheries thing.
When
That's
did
out of their control.
Yeah.
This whole southeast.
but I apparently can't keep a bluefish off of a topwater right now anywhere in the Neuse River Basin, so because they're everywhere. So. But Ricky, any parting words of wisdom?
Just a common sense fishery, man, is all we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Just the numbers can't be trusted, and
Yeah.
just common sense goes a long ways in a lot of life's problems.
Yeah, I got you. Joe?
Nope. I think everything's been said. I mean, we can say a lot more, but it's going to take another hour.
Hey, one thing I knew when I invited you, I wasn't going to be short on conversation. I knew that. Jeff, anything you'd like to add before we go?
No, I appreciate you having us out this evening to talk about this stuff, and I think we've kind of hit on all the topics.
Yeah, I think so. So for the people who tuned in, you can find Jeff on Facebook or on the web, NC Charter Fishing. You can find Joe, Carolina Traditions Guide Company, and of course Ricky, the speckled specialist. You know this is close to his heart just from the name of his charter business. So you can find these guys, and of course you guys know how to find me. So if you want to look for them, they are all full-time guides, and they are in tune, as we talked about, with everything that goes on, not just the location of fish, but the why. And if you are an up-and-coming angler and you want to know the whys, I highly recommend you book one of these guys more than once a year. Go out with them and learn the patterns of these fish. They're not going to show you their favorite hole. Just wipe that out of your mind. But
I'll show you Ricky's favorite hole.
Yeah, and I'll
we'll
show
see.
you, Jeff.
Neither one of them can show them my favorite hole. So
we can't even get to yours. We don't even know how to get to it. So, but
I don't know. Ricky could, because I used to fish some of my spots in a bateau just like that. But
That's right. But I highly recommend you guys book these guys. There's more knowledge in these three than you could even imagine. So again, thank you guys for coming, and thank you guys out there in podcast land for tuning in.